Good morning, world. My name is Tim O'Brien. I'm the senior executive editor of Bloomberg Opinion, the commentary arm of Bloomberg News. And this is our Tuesday morning politics live stream in which we try to sort out the progress, highlights, and lessons of a very extraordinary presidential campaign season. I'm joined today by two extremely talented and smart columnists, my colleagues, Frank Wilkinson and Erica Smith. They both cover politics for Bloomberg Opinion. They are both veteran political watchers and have watched the candidates who are in play in this particular election with over a lot of time and with a lot of depth. I'd like to remind our audience that you can send in questions, and we will try to put some of them up to our panel of geniuses here to see if they can answer them in a way that's useful to you. All three of us are in Chicago today. We are here for this week for the Democratic National Convention, which opened last night with a number of speeches, but two of the big ones, I guess three of the big ones, Hillary Clinton, Jill Biden, and then Joe Biden's swan song. But this is really Kamala Harris's week, Erica, and I wanted to talk about what a moment this is. You know, you enter this particular historical moment as a journalist, as a resident of California, as a young Black woman. There are a lot of avenues into this that I'd love to talk to you and Frank about in terms of the ascent of Kamala Harris. And you wrote a gorgeous column about this yesterday that touched on some of these points. So talk a little bit about how this looks and feels and resonates for you.
Yeah, it is really interesting to be in this moment and to be in Chicago with Kamala Harris being on the ticket. I mean, I followed her for a while. I followed her in Sacramento when she was attorney general and running for the Senate in the Senate. And, you know, everybody's always known that she's been super talented. But this switch, I think, has caught many Americans by surprise, Democrats included. And it's been really cool to just be here among people and other Black women kind of living this moment that they had, dreamed about for years. I think it was a shock still in some ways, also being in Chicago, that Obama was elected president twice. I think people are still like feeling that emotion being in Chicago. Then on top of that, having Kamala Harris, the first Black woman of South Asian descent, potentially being president, already being the nominee. It's just amazing. It's exciting. It's thrilling. It's moving. I think as we saw last night, there was a lot of emotion. People were crying. A lot of talk about this connection of history, from your Fannie Lou Hamers, from women liberation movement, and so it's just there's so many layers to this, and it's just really it's amazing to be here, honestly.
Put a little more clothing on that. Like what is amazing about it? Is it amazing that people never thought that a woman of color could be a presidential nominee? Is it amazing because it's taken hundreds of years of historical turns to finally get here? Like what would you identify as the most amazing things to you?
Yeah, I think when Obama got elected, I think that in my mind, and I think in a lot of people's mind, the idea that we'd have a woman as president was not so shocking anymore. And I've talked to several California Democrats that are here who kind of said the same thing to me. We've heard a lot about this analogy comparison to Barack Obama for Kamala Harris and the coalition she's putting back together, the excitement around her campaign, and all of those things I think are really true. But I think the thing that took most people by surprise is how it happened, right? It's not like there was this long campaign and there was, several people running for the nomination and Kamala Harris rose to the top. It was this shift at the top of the ticket. And all of a sudden it's like, game on. We're just going in the races. And I think that is the part that I think that people are just like, wow, this really happened. And also the fact that it's not just people of color that are really rooting for Kamala Harris. I mean, we've seen numerous Zoom calls of identity groups in raising millions of dollars for her, talking about the need to support Black women. And, at a time when we've seen the Supreme Court, roll back affirmative action, we've seen, no progress on restoring voting rights and several other things that have come out of 2020 when there was this high talking about racial equity and kind of this backlash. To see a Black woman come out of that and the nation, or a large chunk of the nation, get behind her, not just because she's not Donald Trump, but because she is the person that she is just amazing to witness and to kind of hope again that I think that people had in the Obama years.
Yeah, she's certainly not Donald Trump, and
Yes.
it will never cease to amaze that that we've put up both of these. The same country has put up both of these candidates,
Hmm.
and that's profound and instructive, I think, in myriad different ways. But Frank, let's come back to this idea that Erica put her finger on about the kind of speed and momentum that accompanied this moment. Well, we'll get into kind of democratic machinery, but there's this incredible power and energy that, at least from my perspective, emerged much more quickly and was much more unified and coalesced around her candidacy in a way that took me really by surprise. I don't know if it did for you.
It did. And I think, we talk a lot about Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama and Chuck Schumer and other people who were instrumental at the top level, right, of arranging this and encouraging Biden to get out so that someone, Harris, could take over the nomination. I think what that misses is that there was obviously a hunger at the bottom too. This didn't just happen in elite circles. This immediately ignited a very large active base that had been dormant. Now, that's not something that Nancy Pelosi has the power to do, frankly. She's a very powerful woman and she uses her power very well, but that's not Nancy Pelosi. That is millions of people in this country who had a hunger that was not being met. And Kamala Harris appears to be meeting that demand from the base. And I think that's what's difficult about this to really comprehend, because it's amorphous, it's mass, it's a mass movement, and we have difficult time talking about that because it's much easier to say, well, Nancy Pelosi pulled some strings, but this is clearly a much bigger moment than just a few elite Democrats deciding that their candidate was not going to make it to the end line.
The three of us were on a phone call last week with Maria Teresa Kumar, the woman who runs Voto Latino and organizes Latino voters. And she spoke to us, I think, if I have it correctly, that she was with Harris in Flagstaff, Arizona recently. And Maria Teresa has watched a million campaigns and a million candidates and been around different moments of inspiration. And she described it to us as I think she said the crowd went bananas when Harris walked onto the stage, and that she had not really seen that kind of electricity before in a campaign. And Erica, that's something that really strikes me. Not only that the electricity exists and it is surging, and it seems to be coming out of every corner and every pocket of the country, but that Harris, is so comfortable in it too. Like, she looks poised on the stage. She has her lines nailed down. She has the melody of her campaign messaging and her stump speech. Is this a Kamala Harris that surprises you, or is this someone you recognize and have seen before?
It's somebody that I've seen before. I think I've written in a previous column that I've always wanted to root for Kamala Harris because, you know, in talking to her, that person exists, but then sometimes, as in 2020, she'd get out there and it would not everything would be gelling together. She would, not sound authentic, or her timing would be off, or she'd hew a little bit too closely to her talking points. And, I always I've seen obviously that she can do something different and she can be a better candidate than that. And so this person that we see today, I think most people who have followed her at all in California politics have seen. We just haven't seen that enough. And so I think that might have something to do with why a number of Californians aren't particularly shocked by this Kamala that we see. But, to your point, she's been doing the work the last couple of years. So, obviously her start as vice president was rocky on a number of levels. But, one of the things she's been doing the last year, year and a half is touring college campuses, including that one in Flagstaff. And she's been connecting with young voters, voters of color, and really kind of in some ways practicing a little bit out of the public eye because, we in mass media didn't really cover her stump speeches and her campaigning the way that we did, other politicians. And so she's been able to do that without having that focus be on her. And obviously she's gotten more comfortable on the campaign trail. She's, become more authentic. She's gotten to know more voters and what they want. And I think that reaction that we heard about in Flagstaff is what she's gotten on college campuses across the country and what we see now more broadly here in Chicago.
Frank, let's dig into that a little bit more, and then we'll discuss Joe Biden's speech last night. But to me, the Kamala Harris of 2020 was fixed in my head as a smart woman who wasn't a particularly great campaigner, and her campaign team wasn't managed that well. That had sort of locked in there, I think, in a way that blinded me, I think, to the kind of just dynamic, the charisma and the dynamism and the muscularity that she brings into this moment now. Were you surprised by the candidate you're seeing now?
Yes, absolutely. But not shocked, I guess, because she's a talented politician. I mean, I watched her in Iowa in 2020. She's a talented politician. You can see that instantly. And, the way politicians become great, nobody starts off that way. Barack Obama in 2007 was not the same candidate that Barack Obama was in 2008. Great politicians grow, and they grow on the campaign trail particularly. What's shocking to me was that she appeared to grow overnight from, the vice president's office to the nominee of the Democratic Party and take it completely in stride. You see no evidence of insecurity, of faltering. I mean, just great confidence levels, really impressive message delivery. And, I think one other thing is that it may have been very difficult for her to run against fellow Democrats in 2020. And it may be very easy for her and very natural, very organic for her to run against Donald Trump, who she genuinely views as a threat to the republic. So that could also galvanize her as a candidate and really help her rise to the occasion as she has.
One thing.
Go ahead, Erica.
I was going to add one thing. I think to Frank's point about, this happening overnight, one of the things that in doing some reporting and talking to people here that many people have reminded me of is that, this planning for this moment has been going on, particularly among Black women who supported Kamala Harris over the years for many, many years. In some ways, it kind of started when she became vice president. You had these various different groups that came to be and have really supported her and other Black women candidates around the country. And so some of this prep, this kind of rollout that we see, while it seems like it's overnight, it's actually been like in the works in some level, ready to go whenever she steps up. And so I think we're seeing that as well.
And the friendship that developed over the last few years with her and Hillary Clinton. Like Hillary Clinton was ready to activate her network and get her endorsement out the second Biden stepped aside. Like that also speaks to these power reserves, right? That we're hanging out that maybe we didn't see. And then the surge got turned on and lo and behold. I want to come back to you on that, Erica, but I also want to tease one more thing out of Frank. Frank, when you were saying that it might have been harder for her to run against other Democrats than against Trump, is that simply meaning that she was gentler with the home team, there was less competition with other Democrats, so her A game wasn't on full display, but with Trump it is? Or is it something else?
Well, I think inherently messaging is more complicated in a primary. And that was a crowded primary. If you remember, the press was describing the lanes that various candidates were trying to occupy, right? The moderate lane, the progressive lane, et cetera, et cetera. It's a bit of a more complicated message challenge to run in that kind of environment. It's not a complicated message environment to run against Donald Trump, who is a convicted felon, and she's a prosecutor. I mean, we can you can just go through the contrasts here. Those contrasts are difficult to draw in a Democratic primary where a bunch of candidates are ideologically and politically very, very similar. And I think she may have had difficulty distinguishing herself in that field. She certainly doesn't have any difficulty distinguishing herself against Donald Trump.
Eric, I want to talk a little bit about comparing Kamala Harris to Obama.
Mm-hmm.
You and I were having a conversation a week or so ago. I've lost track of time these days, but we were talking about what was different about the Kamala Harris moment from the Barack Obama moment, and this is completely a vibes observation from me, not based in data or anything else. So I'll be happy to be booted off the stage if this is crazy. But I feel like there's a depth of support around the Harris-Walz ticket that is different and deeper and more robust, perhaps, than the level of support that was around the Obama-Biden ticket. Does that seem true to you or not? Or what do you think about? Yeah.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think in part because what Kamala Harris is doing and Tim Walz are doing are building on what Obama and Biden built, right? 2008, 2007 was a very different time than 2024. There's an entire group of young voters that basically didn't have any awareness of politics that now exist, and are, I guess, reportedly planning to vote for the current Democratic ticket. But I think part of it is that, Obama he was a first, right, in so many different ways, and pulling this kind of coalition together, multiracial, multi-ethnic, younger, older, but there was still resistance to the idea of a person of color as president. Not that there's not today, but I think that we've seen it done. And as one California Democrat I was speaking to talked about, when you're first, there's always this pressure, right? If you screw it up, there's a fear that there's not going to be another person like you for, maybe ever, but at least for several years. And, Obama is clearly, he's going to speak tonight, a clearly still beloved, if not the most beloved Democrat in the party. And so the idea that he is kind of this person, this pinnacle, this person that is the perfect Democrat, if there is such one, now having a woman of color come along running for president, it's not like we're comparing what she's doing in this coalition that she's building to somebody who, messed it up in some way. And we don't want to repeat that or go back down that road. There's a lot of Democrats who would love to see an Obama-esque, presidency again. And I think that Kamala is building on that. And so people that might have been skeptical of her, even in 2020, or definitely prior to 2007, are now more willing to give it a shot. And also, I think the other thing is that this country, every year that goes by, becomes more and more diverse, and there's a lot more younger voters, particularly Latino voters, or potential Latino, voters who are Latino, who have a say in this election. And I think we've seen that upswing here in the West, particularly in Arizona and Nevada. And so I think she's pulling from a lot of different groups that just frankly didn't exist in 2007, but she's also riding kind of the tailwind of the Obama Biden administration and what they were able to accomplish.
And Joe Biden is riding the very last puffs and tailwinds of his own administration. Frank, what did you think last night of Biden's swan song and the fact that he's standing on the stage at another incredible historical moment, a sitting president who's elected not to run again after much cajoling? He was resistant to it at first. He ultimately succumbed, I think, because elders in the party were telling him he couldn't beat Donald Trump, while also telling him he was doing damage to down ballot Democrats in other races. And so he finally decided to step aside. And he came out last night after being introduced by both his wife and his daughter. What did you think of his speech, Frank?
I didn't think all that much of it, honestly. I didn't think it was a great speech. I was a little surprised at how similar to a stump speech. It was. There were a lot of elements we've heard before. But this was an opportunity for him to sort of project his administration forward into the the rest of the 21st century. I think he could have done that. I think that wasn't done very successfully. I think it was a healing speech in that he needed to bask in the adulation of the crowd, and the crowd knew very well that they had to deliver that to Biden. That was the transaction we saw last night, which is thank you, Joe Biden, and implicit in that is thank you for leaving the stage so that we now have a different candidate with a better shot to win.
The Democrats have shown, I guess I wouldn't call it a rare, but it is not a frequent enough embrace of realpolitik and well-oiled political machinery ever since Biden belly flopped in his debate with Donald Trump in late June, and in an extraordinarily short period of time, 2 months now. He has stepped aside, and Harris has been ushered in a largely friction-free anointing, and she's now the party standard bearer. Are we seeing a Democratic political machinery, Erica, that was in abeyance during the Biden years, or is it Biden just didn't fuel a campaign with the same kind of charisma and excitement that Harris can? It does feel to me like we're seeing a Democratic Party that is functioning like a well-oiled machine, and certainly is a sharp contrast to Republican disarray, I think.
Yes, definitely a sharp contrast. There's no doubt about that. I do think, the party is, operating more like a machine and more like it should have. And I think, we have Nancy Pelosi in a lot of ways to thank for that, for pushing the party to, frankly, just kind of act like a party and not just go along with whatever Biden wanted. I mean, there needed to be a shakeup in the top of the ticket. And I think it took a few very vocal people with influence, one of them, a main one being Nancy Pelosi, to shock the party into doing what it needed to be done in this high stakes election, which could really determine the future of this country. And there was not a lot of time for just placating egos. And I think Joe Biden's speech last night, I kind of agree with Frank. It sounded like a campaign stump speech that he kind of repurposed in some ways for his goodbye speech. But his exit from the stage needed to happen. And I know a lot of people didn't want to hear that or deal with that, but kudos to those in the inner circle and those with influence who were able to make it happen and to get the Democratic Party to actually do the right thing and act like a party.
Do you think this is a brand spanking new party, displaying all of its electoral finesse, Frank? Or again, is this just a party that's been there and we're seeing it come out in public now?
I think the Democratic Party has been a high functioning party for a while. I don't think that the party's capabilities are new. I think you just look at Nancy Pelosi's tenure as speaker. She had a very narrow majority. She ran the place with great, unanimity, really. Democrats were really unified under her. And I think the party has been functioning at a high level for quite some time. They've been winning off-year elections. They've been outperforming in red districts for a while. So, whether that's going to carry them through to November, I don't know. I suspect it's going to be a big boost. At the same time, what we just saw was unprecedented. I mean, for a party to be able to pull that off. And again, I want to stress it was both the top of the party and the bottom of the party sort of working together. And, that was a really impressive achievement, especially for a party that, as we saw last night, stretches from, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in New York to Andy Beshear in Kentucky. It is a big, big tent. So to pull off that kind of maneuver in that tight a space and time was really, really impressive.
Campaigns there's the machinery that gets the vote out, and then there's the messaging and the imagery that plucks at people's heartstrings. And you wrote a column, I think it was last week, Frank, about masculinity in the Democratic Party, and the kind of man that Tim Walz presents as a candidate, especially in an era when I think GOP messaging, particularly Trumpian GOP messaging, is this cartoonish embrace of kind of steroided masculinity and table thumping machismo. And talk a little bit about that, the kind of imagery we're getting around what it means to be a man in politics these days.
Well, Walz is very difficult. Tim Walz is very difficult for Republicans, I think, because he has these very clear signifiers of traditional masculinity: the football coach, the hunter, the marksman. He wasn't just a hunter; he's actually quite a good shot. 24 years in the National Guard, also helps. But these kinds of traditional signifiers are very difficult for Republicans, and they immediately attacked Walz really as a man. And we saw that with John Kerry to some extent in the 2004 campaign. Kerry was a legitimate hero in the Vietnam War. I mean, he was a very complicated figure for people because he then again turned against the war. But his heroics in Vietnam were attested to by many people. So attacking his courage was important for the Bush campaign, in part because Bush sat out the war in Alabama. But that kind of attack is what we expect from Republicans against a Democrat like that. I think Walz is both more difficult than Kerry because he's so much of an everyman. So there's not the class distance that John Forbes Kerry presented. He's a much more approachable. Walz is a much more approachable figure, but it's also that masculinity is changing as the rest of our culture is changing, and this is kind of a rear guard action against that we're seeing. Someone posted on social media the other day a video of a guy showing men how to sit down in a chair in a masculine way. I mean, it was absurd. I mean, if you are that insecure that you need to worry and practice how you sit in a chair, I don't think masculinity is your problem. I think you have some other issues that you should address. But
like your posture.
Well, I'm not sure how I'm sitting in this chair. It's probably a bad.
No, that wasn't directed at you, Frank, my friend. That was just to men across the universe. Posture first.
But just as we're going through this period where we've had a black president, a woman who ran in 2016 as the first woman Democratic nominee, and now we've got once again a black woman is running. I mean, we're experiencing rapid change in our sort of political culture, and the Republicans do not want to see that change because they don't approve of it, but also because they don't benefit from it.
Erica, in the context of this masculinity discussion, Trump has always, I think, because of his deep insecurity, but also because it gets traction with his base, has always presented himself as the virility candidate, for lack of a better term, and had been positioning himself to run against Joe Biden as the more energetic and virile candidate, and oddly enough, the younger one, the youth candidate, simply because there was a certain house of wax quality to the choices in this. And he's now presented with this conundrum in his world of Kamala Harris, and he really hasn't. He went right away for racism. I can't imagine he'll let go of that at all between now and November or forever. But in addition to that, he hasn't really been able to latch on to how he positions himself as, uh, this force of nature that he prides himself upon, and this remarkable woman he now has to do battle with. And how are you thinking about that? Their inability to get their arms around how to define her.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's you would think that the Republican Party would have planned for this a little bit better than they did. I mean, because this idea that Biden would somehow, be out of the race has been, this rumor that's been floating around Republican circles for far longer, I think, than Democratic circles. And so it's been interesting to see that they've been caught so flat-footed, and not knowing what to do with Kamala Harris. But I guess a lot of it speaks to the fact that Trump just hasn't changed. I mean, he's been using racist tropes for, as long as he's been running in government circles, and same with sexism. And, he hasn't been able to adjust. And I don't see him being able to do that. I think that's going to continue to drag down the Republican message, because he's going to alienate every single person that, the Harris Walls campaign wants to pick up. It's going to help them with people of color. It's going to help them in the swing states in the Sun Belt. Even people who may, for some reason, value what Trump is offering on economics a little bit more, which was very much the story before Biden dropped out. The idea of voting for a man who keeps, harping on, Kamala Harris for her racial identity, and trying to insinuate that she's not really black, and that, she's stupid, and that, all of these various things that he's done, is going to make it harder and harder for people to really, be able to vote for them, because they're really making somebody choose between their own racial identity and the policies that they want. And like, it's going to make it a little bit tougher of a choice. And so the longer he keeps running his mouth, the easier it's going to be for Kamala Harris.
Yeah, my favorite is that he has tried to make the fact that she has a completely magnetic and amazing smile and laugh into some sort of a signal of derangement and negativity. And that has fallen utterly flat. And I moved on to the next one. But it's almost as if he's saying, choose the darkness, and ignore hope and joy. The three of us are going to be together on Friday morning to discuss Harris's Thursday night speech. So we'll have more to talk about on this topic. But before we signed off, I wanted to ask each of you, what's on your radar as fault lines for Harris? What do you think are things that are sort of registering for you that she has to be careful or observant about navigating as she tries to solidify her path to the White House? Frank, you go first.
Hispanic voters come to mind very quickly, and then as a kind of ancillary to that, border politics. I think she's getting some traction on the economy. Her numbers are much better than Joe Biden's were in terms of people's impressions of her on the economy and whether they trust her on the economy. They have to bring in Hispanic voters. I mean, that are just absolutely key in Arizona, Nevada, Pennsylvania. I mean, just go on and on. And I was surprised last night that there weren't more Latino sort of celebrities or politicians up there. AOC obviously was the big one, but I would expect we'll see more of that in the next few days. But they need to solidify that vote. They're not, the Harris campaign isn't where it needs to be with Hispanic voters yet.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think Latino voters are going to be huge with this. But I do think, I was personally, as somebody who lives in California, where the cost of living is just a little bit high, I was pretty pleased to hear her come out with her package about housing. I mean, that's something that, Latino voters in the West, these swing states, Nevada and Arizona, people care a lot about, in part because California has had so many people during the pandemic move into Arizona and Nevada and just basically raise the cost of living. And so I think that if she can really make a solid message on that, I think she's going to, kill two proverbial stones, birds with the same stone, in the sense of she's going to help her standing with Latino voters. And she's also going to really maybe be able to pull Arizona and Nevada. And those are the kind of the two areas that I'm really looking at.
Fantastic. I'm gonna be back with you two on Friday. We're doing a series of special live streams from Chicago this week. I'll be here again tomorrow morning at 8:30 Eastern time with other panelists. But Frank Wilkinson and Erica Smith, thank you for joining us today and for enlightening our audiences. And thank you everyone else for tuning in. I'm Tim O'Brien. I'm the Senior Executive Editor of Bloomberg Opinion. And this was our Tuesday Morning Politics live stream. Thanks for joining us.